This barbed wire will become an exhibit in my museum.
People used to live in this house before the war, and from what remains now we can see it was a nice house, belonging to a nice family, but nobody lives here now. This is a barbed wire. The territory of unrecognized South Ossetia begins behind it, which is literally 10 meters away from where I'm stood. It's written there that this is the territory of the Republic. And further on, where there are ruined homes, that was the Georgian village of Tskhinvali, but it became part of the unrecognized territory of South Ossetia after 2008. No one lives there anymore.
During the war, my husband slept in the gardens where he could find a safe place. My husband was with 3 other people when it got dark. They decided to lie down and get some sleep. At that time, 4 Ossetian men came with guns. They beat them with these guns. My husband's arm was seriously injured. They then told them to walk by the houses and lie on the ground. Then they took some gasoline and poured it over them. They took out a match, lit it and threw it in another direction. They did this 3 or 4 times and then told them to get up and leave.
Ketevan has a husband, 4 daughters, a son, and a few grandchildren. Before the war, this large family lived in this house. The fighting started in Gori on August 9 in 2008 when Russian soldiers arrived in the village. Ketevan's house was burned down within the first couple of days.
The Russians did not kill anyone. They didn't kill anyone, but they walked around here so smugly. It was a really bad experience. It was difficult to look at them. It was emotionally very hard.
Ketevan's family live in the office of a former elementary school. 9 people live cooped up in one room. The rest of the school is occupied by other families. All the family members' mattresses are piled on one bed. They are placed on the floor at night. This is how the family have slept for years. The old storeroom is now their kitchen, but it has no light, so they cook outdoors in the summer. One of Ketevan's 5 children has gone to live and work in Tbilisi. The rest live with Ketevan in the village. They help with the housekeeping. Ketevan could have moved to a town for displaced people outside of Tbilisi, but as they were leaving Gori, her husband developed a headache and his blood pressure rose. Ketevan says it's easier for them to live in their home village.
Of course everything has changed. Before the war I lived in that house. That house had everything, a garden, cows, chickens, pigs. My life was good, but now you can see for yourself the state I live in. Some refugees have somehow managed to start their own businesses, but nothing has worked out for us.
Rati was 19 when the war started in 2008. He served as a contract soldier in the army. He did not stumble across a military career by accident. His father was also a soldier and died during the first conflict with South Ossetia in 1992. On August 5, 2008, Rati's unit were transferred to the outskirts of Tskhinvali, where they encountered resistance from Ossetian Cossacks. Russian soldiers came to aid the Cossacks. Rati's unit withdrew on August 12th. 7 people from his platoon died.
It was really painful. We didn't expect events to escalate like that. The Russians say that we are their brother nation, but it turned out to be the complete opposite.
Rati does not speak Russian and is reluctant to recount his experience of the war. He only mentions in passing the fact that he suffered post-traumatic stress disorder in the few months following the war. The other guys had worse problems. Rati was approached and asked who out of his platoon needs help dealing with this. These people would then receive help from psychologists. But Rati declined. He then went to fight in Afghanistan.
After the war, everyone had serious psychological trauma. Everyone, on both sides.
Gori is one of the most famous cities in Georgia. This is the birthplace of Joseph Stalin, and this is well remembered here. For example, there is a museum dedicated to the dictator here. There was a Georgian military base here during the 2008 war between Georgia, Russia, and South Ossetian separatists. The distance from here to the South Ossetian capital of Tskhinvali is just 30 kilometers. On August 9, 2008, the Russian army carried out air raids on Gori. No less than 60 civilians died and several houses were destroyed. Russia occupied Gori for 4 days. On August 12, Georgian security officers were allowed to enter the city to patrol alongside Russian soldiers. This continued to the end of August. Then the Russian army left, but they didn't go back to Russia. They went to South Ossetia, which is where they remain to this day.
I was working in the city back then, on August 7th, on August 8th. After the bombing, I took my family and left. I went through 8 checkpoints. I didn't tell them that I'm a journalist. I said I was just a civilian. There. That's the price we pay for our independence.
Gori is Goga's hometown. He was working as a journalist here throughout the 5-day war in 2008. His city was bombed before his own eyes.
This is where the Dutch guy was killed. A bomb fell there, in the middle, and a group of journalists were stood there, and that's where Stormians, a cameraman from the Netherlands, died. This was August 12th. On the 9th, there was an air raid on a residential area in the suburbs, and also not far from here, near the school, also on a residential area. But there were no air raids on August 12th. A missile system launched cluster bombs, here in the city centre and on this building. Can you see? Debris. If anyone was stood here, they would have died immediately after the explosion.
Goga still lives in Gori, but he also still has connections in occupied South Ossetia. He communicates with local journalists and residents.
Politicians call it an occupation line, but the more neutral term is separation line. They call it Tskhinvali and we say Tskhinvali. That's Georgian grammar.
Yes, as far as I understand, this is a sensitive issue.
Yes, for example, Achal Gori, Lenin Gori. Did you know that European diplomats write Lenin Gori, Achal Gori with a slash?
Is that the most acceptable way?
Yes, we can agree with it. Ossetian criminals. Why do they say that? Criminals have names and surnames. Why stereotype?
We are in Ergneti. Behind me is Tskhinvali, the capital of unrecognized South Ossetia. It takes 15 minutes to travel from here to there directly, but this is dangerous for local residents. There is a so-called border here, and crossing it runs the risk of fines. This is what happens to local shepherds, for example, who go looking for lost livestock that have wandered over the demarcation line. They are detained and forced to pay around $74. To travel there officially, you have to go to Vladikavkaz in North Ossetia, Russia, and this takes 8 hours.
I know that ordinary people are now ready to reconcile. In a few days, a friend I grew up with in Tskhinvali is coming to visit. I talked to her on the phone and she said, why instead of walking here, which would take 15 minutes? I was ill and she found out about it and was really worried. She said, I want to walk to yours in 15 minutes, but I have to spend the whole day, go via the Verkhnyi Lars checkpoint, via the military road, via Tbilisi. I am especially looking forward for her to come. I know that she will.
Leah's house lies in the Tskhinvali boundary. You can see the barbed wire and Russian military base from her window. Leah's house was burned down in 2008 during armed conflict. A few years later, Leah contemplated setting up a museum in the basement of her newly restored home. She decided to dedicate it to the Russian-Georgian War. The museum opened last year. Leah continues to gather more and more exhibition pieces. People who lived through the war come to her with photographs, bits of shells, shrapnel, artifacts of the atrocities of war.
This is a cluster bomb. This hole is like the sun. My neighbor brought me this debris from a cluster bomb. And look at this. Occupied. All these lines are temporary. You think they don't know this in Tskhinvali? They are just pressured by the Russian side.
Every year in the run-up to August 8, delegations arrive in Ergneti. Officials, diplomats, and their security details gather at Leah's small home. The ministry, which for years worked on regulating the conflict, was renamed as the Ministry of Reconciliation in 2014. It is now headed by Ketivan Tskhinvali. She's a personal acquaintance of Leah's and is often in contact with her. The ministry goal is to attract people from the occupied territories to Georgia. The ministry offers them medical care and education at reduced rates, or even for free. The number of these programs has increased over the last year. According to the minister, more and more Ossetians and Abkhazians are coming to Georgia.
The number of Abkhazians and Ossetians using this service offered by the Georgian government has increased 6 times in the last 3 or 4 years. We have a few mechanisms in place as part of this new initiative, such as electronic registration, so that people don't have to physically bring in certain documents.
According to Ketivan's predecessor, Georgia is implementing these programs more or less unilaterally. Therefore, these good initiatives do not always operate efficiently.
These are very good steps, but they're unilateral. We need to do these things jointly, together with them, and not just impose on them, as in offer these things from our high horse, when they already have Russia for it. The officials wrote some things and went to Brussels, New York, Vienna to voice them. And it's clear that this was just being done for the West, to show the West, look how good we are, what kind of things we're offering. And the people listened to them speaking from New York, Vienna and Brussels. They wanted to hear them in Tskhinvali and Sukhumi, and it's not like they don't have any means to tell them personally. Why don't you tell us these things first? Why is it all done through the television? That's why they closed off.
Jana Javashishvili has been working with displaced people since the 1990s. She says that during the first conflict between Georgia and Abkhazia, no one was ready for the influx of refugees. People did not know what post-traumatic stress syndrome was. Locals had to fight over bread and water with the displaced people. The situation in 2008 was completely different. Jana commends the idea of temporary accommodation for displaced people, which have, for many, become permanent. Jana adds that these towns have no infrastructure or places where people can gather and socialize, which is a big part of Georgian culture. Jana refers to these places as barracks.
No matter how well you work, it's still a humanitarian disaster when that happens. There is not much to boast about because even now it's hard for displaced people in Georgia. Because once a conflict starts, the international money comes in and things get done, and now they've already forgotten about it. The issue of internally displaced people is painful and no one wants to be constantly reminded of it. The government has a way of forgetting this, and so does the local community.
Did this used to be Georgian territory?
Yes. We live there in Ossetia, and we have a good relationship with them.
Is this a cemetery?
Yes.
The one on top of that hill?
Yes.
And when did they stop allowing you there?
After 2008.
Leah does not say anything about the war, either because she does not speak Russian very well or out of fear of dragging up memories of the past. Both Ossetians and Georgians lived in Plavi before the war, but then Ossetians left for the occupied territories. That's also where the graves of Leah's father and other relatives ended up being. She hasn't been able to visit them since 2008. Although there's no barbed wire in the way there, few people risk crossing to the other side. How can I arrange it so that you can go and visit? Will they arrest me?
Yes, I think they will.
You can barely tell that it's the 10th anniversary of the war here in Tbilisi. The people we talk to think that Georgia is not doing enough to ensure reconciliation. However, they are certain about one thing. Russia is preventing this process more than any other side.
Russia closed off all these borders on purpose to stop Georgians and Ossetians from seeing each other. They know that they would find common ground straight away, find the path to each other's hearts.
Georgians and Ossetians are the closest people, the most closely related people, but they've already started communicating on a human level. This was impossible in 2009. There is all this Russian propaganda and the image of an enemy preserved within the Georgian people. But the people who talk to us, who know the customs of Georgian people, don't believe the propaganda. Nobody needs this war. Lots of ordinary people have suffered because of it. More civilians than soldiers died in this town, and in Georgia altogether, because of the war. These people know what war is much better than we do, hence they're wiser than us. They endured more pain and experience.
If the Georgian government decides to return these territories by force, would you go and fight?
It's not something he wants to do, but if there's no other option, then of course.
Did you forgive them?
What else is there to do? You don't want war.